Hello, and welcome to Chapter 15, Part 3 of 3, where we talk about the Reconstruction in the South and the North, the election of 1872, the Panic of 1873, and the final last bits of end of Reconstruction. Of course, we know in the South that Republicans dominated government at the time. The South is under military control. Population shifts are happening everywhere as we have Northerners going south, Southerners going north, and everywhere there's an opportunity to gain political advantage, create wealth, greed, it's going to happen. And there are also other instances where people will move to other areas for humanitarian reasons. We see ministers setting up new churches in the South from the ones that were burned previously. We see teachers that are opening up schools. And we see asylums and hospitals now being built and medical profession being shifted around all throughout the United States. Of course, in our past slideshow, we talked about scalawags and carpetbaggers. Both of them are just interchangeable terms for people who want to gain control or seize an opportunity to make or create wealth in the United States on the backs of those trying to reconstruct the United States of America. Would like you to watch this short little video here embedded into your slideshow. We finally, for the first time, have African American legislators. Question becomes this, though. How do you empower African Americans to stand up and run for such office? How would Democrats feel about this? And how would those who oppose the 13th Amendment feel about this? And finally, Jefferson Davis, of course, the first and only president of the Confederate United States of America, how does he feel about an African American taking his former seat in Mississippi as a state senator? How well did the South do? What legacy will they leave behind for the future after their time in control is up? History tends to judge us much on our failures and not our successes. Our current president, Donald Trump, he may have done wonderful, great things for this country. However, the one thing he will be possibly remembered for is the violence at the White House this past week. So, did the Republicans rule well? Did they abuse their power? Because everybody does at some point or another in their life. Did the Republicans govern responsibly? Did they use the money wisely? Did the Republicans become selfish in ways that created corruption? And you will see time and time throughout history, both political parties will do this. And that's why I believe in America today, many people have given up on political parties because they see them both as the same evil in life. That's not to say that all Republicans and all Democrats are bad. It's just, unfortunately, the way history judges us, we remember the bad things and not the good things. And so there could be one bad apple for 100 good people, and unfortunately, they all get labeled as bad apples. The accomplishments and the facts about Republicans and what they were able to accomplish during this time during Reconstruction. All males can now vote, a voting age. Women can own property. They provide a pathway of debt relief for people in the South. They provided modern penal codes, which are code of laws concerning crimes, offenses, and also the punishments that go with them. So it's a standardized way of punishment throughout the United States. If you were in the South and you committed the crime, you might receive a jail sentence of 2 years. If you did that same offense in the North, you might only receive a jail sentence of 30 days. But now it's pretty much standardized. The Republicans are going to heavily promote the infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and road systems. Of course, we have roads now that go all the way out to California, but we don't have too many railroads that go from south to north at this time. The Republicans are going to be noted as the ones who establish hospitals, asylums, homes for the disabled. We've seen some of these pictures in the past when we were in class, and for the time, it perhaps seemed like a good alternative, but when we look back upon it, we can see that the horror that it really was. We now have a promotional school systems in the South that benefits all races. And we have the overhauling of the tax system and selling bonds. Selling bonds is a way to create money so that you can build infrastructure in the United States. For example, Ashley Community Schools had an addition put on a number of years ago with the brand new gym and the brand new part of the school. I believe you guys were just little guys at the time. And it cost, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a number of $10 million. Well, Ashley Community Schools doesn't have $10 million just sitting around waiting to build things. So what they do is they sell these little pieces of paper, promissory notes if you want to call them that, which are bonds, to investors. And it tells the investor, Mr. Investor, I'd like you to buy this bond, and over the course of 10, 15, 30 years, we will pay you an interest rate of 3 or 4 or 5%. It's a guarantee because it's backed up by the government of the United States of America. Bonds can also be sold for the replacement of bridges in municipalities. It can be done to fix roads. It can be done to raise money for war efforts, such as we did in World War II. But we also have the failures of the Republican Party. They are depicted as wasteful and corrupt. Wow, it almost sounds like our government system today. Many instances of grafting, which is basically using your power in the current position that you're in to get personal gain. And of course, also wasteful spending. This happens with both political parties. It's happened in the past, happens in the present, and will continue to happen in the future. And I hope and wish that people would take more note about what's happening in America and perhaps try to put an end to that particular greed. But I'm not in a position of political power, so I guess I don't understand how it works. The North. There was just as much corruption in the South as there was in the North. There's just as much corruption in the Republican Party as there was the Democrat Party. So when we look at history, there's no one real party that was the saviors of America. And again, that's not to say that all Republicans, all Democrats, all politicians are bad. It's just they happen to get labeled in a general category of not very good people. In the North, there's something called spoilsmen, and that's simply giving job and government favors to your supporters. Happens today, happens all the time. Let's just say that you are running for the position of the United States president. Well, you have a couple good friends, wealthy friends, who have connections to power, to wealth, to other people. So you might say, Susie, if you help me get elected, I will put you in a position of transportation, Secretary of Transportation. Or Brian, if you help me get reelected, I will make you my vice president. Whatever. There's also something called insider trading with stocks. Again, see page 300 for a list of these and other corruptions that happen in the North. Insider trading is knowing something's going to happen in the stock market before everybody else does. Perhaps you know that Apple products is coming out with the iPhone 25. Nobody else in America knows it except for you and the person who was creating it at the time. And so you know that when Apple produces a new product, its stock worth tends to go up. Well, if you know this and you know that they're releasing the Apple iPhone 25, chances are you're going to buy a lot of stock at a cheap price. And then when they actually do release the Apple iPhone 25, bingo, the stock rises and you create wealth. That's insider trading. Again, just as in the North as there was a South, just as Republican is or Democrat, if there's an opportunity to make wealth and create wealth, it was done. And I say here that power leads to greed, power often leads to wealth. We're going to take it to modern times right now, but our congressional leaders in D.C. are paid $174,000 a year. Now, we have some people that have been in Congress for many, many years, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years plus. Unofficially, because I couldn't find an official statistic, but everything I've looked on online, unofficially, 50% of our congressional leaders are millionaires. So ask yourself this. How does one become a millionaire on a salary of $174,000? Now, again, one could say, oh, well, if somebody works for 10 years, that means they'll be $1.74 million richer. Yeah, but you also have bills to pay and whatnot. So use your imagination. There are many reasons why they might be millionaires. Perhaps they have inherited wealth. Perhaps their spouse has wealth. But it's kind of funny that for a salary of $174,000 that you have millionaires in Congress. And of course they want to keep their position in Congress because it's nice, it's guaranteed. In the North, we also have the Industrial Revolution Part 2 in full swing. Part 1 was 1765. Part 2 is the Reconstruction era. Part 3 is 1969-ish, launching of man to space, computer age. Then we also have Part 4 unofficially, which is around 1996-ish or so with the invention of the internet. Churches will also help pave the way to freedom. Hundreds of independent African American churches form. African Americans are left the white dominated churches for the Negro Baptist and the African Methodist Episcopal churches. And I put the link in there if you wanted to know more information about the churches. And African ministers emerge as leaders in the African American community, providing hope, chances, and peace for the African American people. No longer do African Americans have to go to a white church and assimilate to the white ways of worshiping their God. Remember, when we brought slaves over here to America, they brought their culture with them. But as time went on, their culture kind of disappeared into the books of history. And so this was a wonderful way for African Americans to get together, to celebrate their heritage, to celebrate their religion, to celebrate the way they want to celebrate God. It was really a positive thing for the people. And if you've never been to a Southern Baptist church, like say in Georgia and Alabama or Mississippi, I would highly encourage you to look up YouTube. They are very, very exciting to go to. They're full of energy. I've been to a number of churches in my time, and it just seems like the churches I go to are rather plain Jane, kind of sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand, kneel, song, song, stand, stand, kneel, kneel, sit, stand, song, kneel. Whereas the African American churches I've been to, it's just full of song, full of just joy. Just it's just so exciting, and perhaps maybe my scope of regular churches is not well enough. But if again, if you ever have a chance to go there, if not, check it out on YouTube. They're very exciting. And so this going to church for the African Americans again provided hope. It brought people together, unified them, and and when it unifies people, it gives them hope, it gives them prosperity as a culture to rise up and do good things in their community. Education, the key to prosperity. As you will hear me say to my seniors all the time, you need education outside of Ashley Community Schools for whatever it is you're going to do. I don't care if it's going to college, I don't care if it's going to trade school, or going to truck driving school, or if you're a manager at McDonald's, you're going to have to go through some kind of training. Education is the key to prosperity. So I want you to check out page 299 for the graph, the percent of children enrolled in school between the different races. African Americans would find a way to establish their own independent schools and to pay educated African Americans to become their teachers, which is a very positive thing, again, for their culture, because when we opened up the Freedmen schools, the Freedmen's Bureau, it was typically a white female teacher who would teach all black children. And so they had to assimilate to the white ways of thinking, the white ways of speaking and whatnot. And now you have African American teachers teaching African Americans, somebody who can relate to them, somebody who can understand them, somebody who can help preserve their history, their culture, their heritage. And I put down, remember what we did to the Native Americans. We took them from their tribes, we cut their hair, we took off all their uh, clothing and put them in white man clothing. Well, we did some of the similar things to black Americans. So again, I think that's another stain on American history that we don't focus on very much and we don't remember very well. Black colleges will be established to prepare black ministers and teachers, just as the whites did nearly 100 years ago prior to this period. So 100 years ago prior to 1870, colleges were being established to prepare white males for the ministry and to become teachers. 100 years later, it's finally the time for the African Americans to do such. And some of these all African American schools are located in Georgia, Alabama. I think there's a few in Florida, but I don't know as if they're all black students anymore. I think they've admitted white students now, but it's still predominantly that way. Sharecropping, which is I call the new slavery or servitude. You're a slave, but you're not a slave when it comes to sharecropping. What happens is um, white landowners get African Americans to sign a contract to work in the fields. Contracts will set the terms for the African American, and if you can't read and you can't write, and you're just simply relying on the word of the white person and the person that's filling out the contract, and you just simply sign your X or sign your name, well, you're legally bound to that contract. So in sharecropping, the the landowner, which would be the white person, would provide the seed and other necessities such as farm supplies, tools, equipment, things like that, in return for a share of that particular harvest. So again, Brian comes to me, wants to work a piece of land, and I say, sure, Brian, you can do that. However, I will provide you the seeds. You can use my tractor, you can use my hose or shovels or whatever. However, I get 50% of your whatever it is you are growing. And it could be more than 50%, could be a little less too. So this would give not only for just black people, but for also white people too, a chance. And I put in air quotes, a chance, but left a little opportunity for advancement. Because if you're giving up 50% of your harvest, what do you do with the remaining 50% that you have in your hand? You got to feed your family. Slight if, there might be a little bit left over that you could possibly sell in a market, but that's a slight if. And so you're caught in this vicious cycle of poverty. And we're talking about the good years. Let's talk about the bad years where crops happen. And um, if you're only getting 50% of your crop, and if your crops only yielded 50% of what you planted, well, you're that much less in the hole for that year. And so it becomes a very vicious cycle of poverty that becomes very generational. This is the election of 1872. This is where Ulysses Grant is voted into office. He runs against a Democrat named Horace Greeley. You'll see in the chart there that he receives many, many votes, but yet he doesn't receive a electoral vote. And that's simply because Horace Greeley died just within a couple days of the Electoral College convening and casting their vote for that person. And so what ended up happening is those who were going to cast their vote for Horace Greeley, they ended up casting their vote for the other Democrats. Well, long story short, Ulysses Grant won. At this time, the Republicans are starting to lose their foothold because of all the corruption and greed that's going on in America. And so you'll find liberal Republicans are going to mosey on over to the Democratic side of things. They're going to advocate civil service reform, end the railroad subsidies, withdraw troops from the South, lower the taxes, and have free trade. So as the Republican Party is losing their foothold, they're losing members to other political parties. The Panic of 1873. With every boom in the economy comes a bust. With every bust comes a boom. Typically in America, that happens about every 8 years-ish or so. So we think back to the Great Depression of 1929. If we can move forward 8 years, there's kind of a boom, and that boom happens to be the beginnings of World War II. And we'll have a bust cycle that follows. The last bust cycle that we really had here in America was 2008, during the 2008 housing crisis. And what had happened was homeowners were getting loans for houses that they just simply couldn't afford. And banks were dishing out money left and right. And many people got caught in the whirlwind of things, and they ended up losing their house. So 2008 was the last bust we had. Not sure if we can call this what we're going through a boom or not. And if we can, okay, but again, with every boom comes a bust. So if you're investing in stocks, mutual funds, commodities, things like that, understand that the prices are going to rise and they're going to fall. But given over a long period of time, they're going to rise. So the Panic of 1873 lasts approximately 4 to 5 years officially. Again, unofficially though, it's going to last about 7 to 8 years because for all of America to recover at this time. And this happens mostly because of the speculation investments in railroad systems. Businesses fail, depression sets in. There was a demand that paper money not be supported by gold. The idea that let's just print more money to help out the American people. Grant vetoed the bill for the release of additional paper money, or what's called greenbacks at this time.
After his
And of course, there's a little video embedded, so I'd like you to watch that video too as well. The end of the Reconstruction comes to us. We have the rise of the KKK in 1867 by ex-Confederate General Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. And my gosh, look at his eyes. It just almost reeks of evilness. There is a rise or continuation of white supremacy ideologies. You know, if you remember from Johnson, Johnson was warning the American people of an Africanized society in America. So this idea of white supremacy has been around for many, many years. This idea still exists today here in America. How so, I don't know. But there are still KKK clans located throughout America, officially and unofficially. There's something called the Amnesty Act of 1872, which will remove the restrictions on ex-Confederates, except for the top leaders. Why did they do this? Because they knew that if Republicans could free up a new segment of population that could vote, and if the Republicans help that segment of the population, they're going to get those votes. Excuse me, it wasn't by Republicans, it was Democrats. The election of 1872. We see Rutherford B. Hayes becomes our next president. And if you look at the electoral votes, it is not the majority. There is a 1 vote difference. And by the popular vote, there's nearly a 270,000 vote difference, which is not that much. Just as there was supposed corruption in our election system this year, just as there was contested races going on this year, happened back then too as well. Even though Tilden wins the majority of popular votes, Hayes wins the Electoral College votes, but it wasn't a majority. You must win the majority of the Electoral College votes in order to be elected President of the United States. And in today's terms, that means 270 votes. There are 3 states, South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana, whose returns were contested. So to win this election, Tilden needed only 1 electoral college from each state to win. A special electoral college commission was created to determine who was entitled to those disputed votes. It becomes a straight party vote, 8-7, and the commission gives the votes to Hayes. The Dems threatened to filibuster the results and send the election to the House of Representatives, which Dems controlled at the time. If the election of the president goes to the House of Representatives, each state delegation will cast a single vote for one of the top 3 contenders, or in this case, it would be 2, from the initial election to determine a winner. In history, only 2 presidential elections have happened like that, 1800 and 1824, have been decided in the House. So let's just say today that there was a dead tie between Biden and Trump. That tie goes to the House of Representatives, whether it's Republican controlled or Democrat controlled, and each state gets to cast 1 vote for the person of their choice. So if it's a Republican controlled House of Representatives, chances are that that Republican nominee might become president. Compromise of 1877, and I'm sorry, this is the election of 1876, not 1872. So Rutherford B. Hayes agrees to the results, but he has some conditions. And it says, okay, Hayes, you're president, but you must end federal support for the Republicans in the South, protections, and you must support the building of a southern transcontinental railroad. Hayes says, okay, you got yourself a deal, and I'll even withdraw the troops from the South. And so we have the ending occupation of the troops and the militarized zones in the South. Your assignment today, read page 303, Historical Perspectives. Did Reconstruction fail? Would like you to answer the following questions. In what two ways do you think the Reconstruction was a success? In what two ways do you think the Reconstruction was a failure? And part 3 is choose one or the other. Name one way you would have led a clear path for Reconstruction as president, or what would you have done differently during the Reconstruction if you were the president? With each response, you must back up your answer with evidence either from the lecture, from the book, or other sources. This is to be done in Google Docs and submitted through Google Classroom and is due by Sunday night. So that when we come back to class on Monday, we can go over all of this stuff. This concludes Chapter 15, Part 3.